Okay, good afternoon. I'm calling to order City of Hall special meeting. May I have a roll call of council members, please?
Council President Roeder.
Here.
Councilmember White. Here. Councilmember Schaefer.
Here.
And Councilmember DePriest.
Here. Okay, we have a quorum. We're just going to roll into unfinished business. We'll save the flag salute for the regular meeting, which is an action item of the Ramsey Road Extension Project. It is just a discussion.
Is it listed as an action item? Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will kick off the meeting, and then what I'd like to do is hand it off to Carissa Nelson, who's here representing LTAC. The project that we're going to get you up to speed on is what I call the Ramsey Road Extension Project. It probably has a more formal name than that, but given the time that I've been with the city, I haven't been exposed to know exactly the name of it, but this is an extension of Ramsey Road from Wyoming to Lancaster. And you see it does extend beyond Lancaster, but those are future plans. Part of what we need to talk with council about is the federal funding that has been allocated towards this project that's been handed down through the funding system that the state of Idaho has put together, which is to run through LTAC, Local Highway Technical Assistance Council. I've had a brief interaction with most of you about how the federal funds make it through the state, but for the sake of high-level conversation tonight, I'll explain that the state has transportation pot of money. It is allocated through the legislature, through this ITD allotment, as well as LTAC. LTAC funnels those funds down to the state, or excuse me, to the local roads through the rural funds and the urban funds. Our funding is through urban funds. And this project was applied for back in 2012 and it's been part of and dovetailed into our transportation plans. The project has gone through iterations, I'll call them, over the course of the last 12 years. Where we're at today, the funds that have been allocated towards this project have to be spent, have to be allocated by this year. What that means is the city needs to enter into an agreement with the state and the federal, state and local agreement to show that these funds are being used in the way that they've been planned. The challenge that we're at tonight is a challenge that communities across the state of Idaho, I think across the nation, are facing, and that is the cost of construction is an ever-evolving door of growth or change, and we are faced with the same problem here. So essentially, and I'll let Carissa get and our representatives, staff representatives besides myself, speak to the numbers, because I don't have them memorized to be able to speak to them tonight, is that we are short about 1.7 million between what the state has allocated, our match funding, and the federal funds that are coming to us. You're also going to hear that range possibly grow by $1 million based on the transportation, or the cost of construction, excuse me, for transportation projects. So essentially we're looking at a 1.7 to $2.7 million shortfall. In order for us to bid the project, we have to have those funds in hand, and those funds are then reimbursed to the city. So with that, I'll get to the end goal, which I know we always like to know, what are we hoping to achieve tonight? And that is to potentially discuss with you how we can, given the funds that we do have access to through the state, is how we can break apart the road project, meaning the federal objectives, the state objectives, and the objectives of the city, while still completing, hopefully, the majority of this project. And with that, unless there's another opportunity to share the high-level information, I'd like to hand it over to Carissa, minus any questions. Go ahead.
Since you said federal objectives, what is the federal objective?
I'll let Carissa talk about those, but it has a lot to do with how we phase the funds if we break it apart, the requirements that each phase sort of stand alone, as I like to refer to it. And so with that, Ms. Carissa.
Thank you. So again, I'm Carissa Nelson and I work for LTAC, and I'm one of our staff engineers there. We administer the federally funded projects to the 287 different jurisdictions throughout the state of Idaho. So that federal money that comes from federal highways. And so speaking to federal objectives, anytime you take federal money, it has federal strings and federal rules. And so we'll kind of get into some of that of what some of those rules are. So we are constrained to fitting the project within their rules. As we've looked at this project, so again, as Lisa Elport said, this project applied for funding in 2012. I came to LTAC in 2011. So I have not been the project manager on this project the entire time, but I have seen it. I'm also our staff environmental engineer, so I've seen it from an environmental perspective and now from a project administration perspective. What I have seen is that there has been a series of issues that have been troubleshooted on this project throughout the course of that 12 years. There's been a lot of reasons for the delays. One of the primary reasons has been this portion here that goes through the airport RPZ zone. So there was a lot of back and forth with the airport. Some of you may know the history here. And so as the project delayed and construction costs escalated, we've looked at ways for how can we make the project fit the budget as is. So one of the first things that was done was the very northern portion of the project was stripped off and said, let's attack that at a later phase. And then looking at the remainder of the portion then, about a couple years ago, we knew we were still short the entire portion. So we looked for what's a good phase break. So this is where we start getting into those federal highway objectives. Federal Highways is adamant that phasing must have independent utility and logical termini. And right now, the operations engineer that oversees all LTAC projects really only accepts intersections as logical termini. So we had to show that this phase and this phase are independent of each other. They don't want us to be building roads to nowhere that then never get the remaining funding, and so what was built was useless. So they want to make sure that those federal dollars have use. So that's kind of some of their funding constraints. More of their funding constraints is they don't want money to be hanging out there indefinitely. So you have a certain amount of time to get to that next milestone. So from when we obligated funding for right-of-way, you've got 10 years to get to the construction phase. So that's kind of one of those timeframes that's ticking now, is that we've obligated money for right-of-way. We've started acquiring. This project has an extensive amount of right-of-way, 21 parcels, is that right? 21 parcels, so that takes a lot of coordination, and just, you know, please recognize that Alan has been the lead point on this. He's done a tremendous job of coordinating this. That's just a lot of work, and it takes time, and particularly when you have reluctant property owners, which Alan has had a couple of those reluctant property owners that he's been working with. So what we're looking at now is, again, as you kind of time goes on, you continue to be short. So what we decided a few years ago is we built this section and maybe try to get funding later on here. Well, Glenn Miles is the representative at the Urban Committee. So this pot of money, there's a lot of different federal pots of money. This pot of money is the Urban Committee. So it's a statewide, all of the MPOs throughout the state sit at the table and they say, you get this much money for the year. How are we going to divide this equitably? This is not something that LTAC decides. It's not something that Federal Highways decides. It's something that the state Urban Committee decides, is how and when money is allocated. They only have so much money, and how do they get it to the different projects? And I will say Glenn has a history of being incredibly successful at getting more share of the money than some of the other MPOs. And so he has gone back to the well many, many times for this project, asking for additional money. Again, the longer we had to delay this, the more construction costs escalate, the more complicated things have become. And so he was able to go back and get some additional funding last year. And at that point in time, kind of where the budget numbers were at, we thought, well, maybe we can build the whole thing. It's going to be from, and when I say the whole thing, this green portion and the magenta portion, not the reddish one at the top. But again, it's like your estimates are always lagging, and so we're always doing iterations of how do our estimates match with what's actually happening on the ground. And so the design consultant who's designed this is David Evans and Associates, and the most recent construction estimate that they had was October 23. So So you think that's pretty recent, but yet we're still seeing some pretty significant cost escalations from them. So that's kind of where we get that 1.7 million funding gap was kind of October, November. And then now we're looking at probably another $1 million just to this point in time. And what it is you have to have an estimate that's based on current construction costs when you submit the package to I2D. They bid it to the contractor. And at that point in time, before they will bid it, before they will accept it for obligation and accept it for bid, they have to have the city's portion of funding match whatever's come from that federal pool. And then if there's any more money that's a gap, they have to have that. And so our conversations with Glenn the last month have been, as we've kind of said, hey, we have at least a 1.7 million funding gap, maybe more, or likely more, and now we kind of have a dollar amount to that. Is there any way you can go back to the urban committee and ask for more money? Again, he's been historically very successful at that. So they just had a committee meeting in February. And at that point in time, what Glenn is saying is, I've tapped out the resources. I don't think that I can be successful at getting more. I'm not prepared to ask for more, at least until the city comes to the table and shows due diligence. And so what he's saying at that point in time is, I'm asking the city to fill that $1.7 million gap. So there's an urban committee meeting every quarter, and that's kind of where they assess and they balance it. So they look at where projects actually came in at bid versus where they were going out, which ones, maybe some of the other projects, maybe they're having issues like we did with the airport. Maybe they have to push their construction years out. And so then maybe there's extra money, maybe there's a shortage of money, and they play the Tetris to try to fit the funding. Again, Glenn's been very successful at that in the past, at getting that extra money then and getting it allocated to this project. So the next funding, or the next meeting for the urban committee is in April. But really what he's asking at this point in time is the city needs to come up with the gap. So that's kind of where we're at here today. You know, as we as a team, as Alan and Lisa and I have discussed, you know, what happens if the city can't come up with the funding? You know, what happens then? You know, and so there's a lot of different things. So again, once that right-of-way money has been spent, you have 10 years to get it into construction. If you don't get it to construction, what happens is then the city has to pay back that money to federal highways because you're not meeting their objectives. Again, I've been at LTAC for 12 years now. We have yet to see that. Again, we have a very strong commitment to helping you locals and to advocating for you guys to make sure that you're compliant with those federal rules when you take that federal money. And so we're here to be your advocate and to be the advocate of the project. You know, so there's some hard decisions to be made. But that, you have a question?
Yes, Clarissa. Thank you. Just for council's full understanding, because money has been committed, as I understand it, this project, what would be the amount the city would have to repay if we don't get this done?
That's a great question. I don't know for sure what and how much of the design dollars would have to be returned. And I don't know the total design money that's been allocated. We have about $2.8 million of right-of-way funds that have been allocated and spent, so that's just right-of-way.
That's what I'm getting at. It's more than 1.7.
Yeah, and I think that there's more than $1.5 million in design dollars too.
So we're up to about 4 then.
Right. So then we start looking at some different ways. So again, you know, up till last year, we were looking at building this phase. So, you know, as we come back to the table, we say, well, what if we come back to here? We still have 10 years. Probably more like 8 now to build the second portion. One of the things Alan suggested is, well, maybe we look at flipping these too, and kind of looking at the dollars to see how do we utilize the best. But I think that, you know, first and foremost, we're trying to get this whole project built, right? But that's a big ask for a city. How do we find and bridge that funding gap? So this is kind of here just to kind of bring you up to speed, tell you where we're at, you know, to discuss kind of what we're looking at. Again, if we have that 2.7 million funding gap versus the 1.7, we're looking at like a total all-in project, about 9.5 versus $10.5 million project for construction here. And it's pretty much kind of like a 2/3, 1/3. And so this is one of the things that Alan was suggesting is maybe flip it against that you get a 2/3 bill, which is more, and then kick the can down here. So there's some different options and some different ideas. No decisions have been made, but it's all, the deadline is August 1st for getting this into ITD. Or before we lose the construction dollars. So what happens if we lose the construction? They're obligated this year, the $7.8 million, I think that the urban committee has scheduled for this project for this year. To get it obligated, that has to be the match money, everything turned into ITD with the complete design, PS&E package, absolutely no later than August 1st. So that's kind of what we're looking at.
And our city would have to have that paperwork submitted so that there's time to process it before it goes to ITD by approximately
June.
June?
Yeah.
June 1st? Thank you.
No, I think actually August 1st is, it's the end of October, so I think August 1st is our paperwork deadline.
I think Glenn was mentioning that we had to have a urban, or local, state and local agreement around the June timeframe.
June timeframe.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
And that gives us a little bit of wiggle room. So they will, August 1st, they start sweeping money. So what he's saying is you've got to get it in advance, so maybe that's your question.
Yes.
Okay. And if he knows that it's likely that you're not going to make it, they're going to start sweeping it earlier. So come that April meeting, they're going to have a hard look at this project and say, what is the likelihood that this is going to utilize that funding? Because it's a very big hole for them to fill.
Question, how much has the city put into this project thus far? Or how much have we invested in the project thus far?
City dollars?
Yes,
I don't know. that I have
roughly.
that.
We have budgeted our match, which is 7.34% in our impact fees for circulation.
Mike?
$500,000?
So about $500,000, okay, I'm just curious what we put into it.
Yeah. I don't know that, but I can get those numbers.
That's all right, I'm just curious, a rough number.
That's my best guess.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm taking 7.5 million times 7% hitting $500,000.
And the design dollars are a little different than construction dollars. So design dollars, as we have gone through several iterations of design, is the city doesn't have to front that money. What they do is they pay the bill to David Evans and Associates, and then you're reimbursed minus your match. So it's kind of incrementally along the road, you've been paying little bits. But construction, they say we want all of your match up front.
What she was saying is if we get a bill for $25,000 from the engineering firm, we pay that
And then you get
in
that
totality, and then the state refunds us the 90 or the 80.
7.34%.
Right.
Yeah.
So the right-of-ways that we've purchased so far, where'd that money come from?
That came from the same federal highways. And it's the
Okay.
same way, you pay for it and you submit it for reimbursement, and you get the reimbursement minus the 7.34%.
Okay, and have we gotten that reimbursement yet?
For most of it, yes.
Finished.
Okay, thank you.
And,
When you were talking about this, you were expressing a number between $9.5 and $10.5 million. Could you restate, is that the total budgeted cost to
That's
fit?
for construction, so that doesn't include design, it doesn't include the right-of-way acquisition. So to construct from Ramsey Road, Wyoming Avenue,
All the way?
up to Lancaster Roundabout.
Okay, $10.5
Current
million.
construction estimate.
Okay. And doesn't include design or, okay. And could you please explain for me the 1/3, 2/3 thing you were just talking about before?
Sure. When you look at that, we'll call it $10.7 million, that's the very conservative, that's kind of what we're looking at the most. It looks like about 2/3 of that money is the magenta portion of the project, and 1/3 approximately is the green portion of the project.
Okay. And what was the reason that you might flip it and do the 2/3 before the 1/3?
It's to maximize the use of those dollars if we were to not construct all of it as part of this funding cycle, and then seek those funds for the remaining portion within the 10-year timeframe.
Got it.
So we have $7 million on the table right now. That's, the urban pot has given the city of Hayden for this project. So if we look at that 10.7, 2/3, 1/3, we're looking kind of more on the order of close to $7 million for the magenta portion and close to 3.7 for the green portion. And so when we're matching numbers, if we use this, we leave $4 million on the table.
Got it.
If we use this, it leaves significantly less on the table. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And then, and eventually, you're gonna have to fill that gap. This is a smaller gap for you to fill than this. And these are rough numbers, but that's just kind of ballparking it. And if you look at it, this is approximately half the distance of this. This also has a very complex roundabout, so that roundabout is a very construction-heavy cost.
So I guess in the result of this workshop today and the action item that we want to bring forward to council is the ability to move forward with the model that Carissa has presented on what do we call it, 1B, which is the magenta
Yeah.
section.
So this one is labeled as 1B, and this section is labeled as 1A for the project. And that's because originally we had it phase 1 and phase 2, and then we started looking like, oh, this is too big. We can't fund the whole thing. We need to find a place to break this whole thing. So we did 1A, 1B.
So am I getting this right, hearing this right, the proposal suggestion, however you want to term it, is that we do flip it and go ahead with the construction of the 1B portion, which if we did complete that, it would then, where it comes together there, terminus there, we already have road there of some kind, right? So you're probably going to get whatever, and then it's going to funnel down into probably a narrower road currently.
That's kind of the road.
So the point being is that when you have that magenta in there, you end up having a network of roads to absorb that traffic instead of them all being funneled into one road versus Ramsey
So
being the collector.
you're saying where you just drew those thin blue lines
Yeah.
that people could, instead of going all the way around the bend, that people could come down those two little thin lines, so you in effect would possibly have 3 different roads that the people coming off of the magenta could then use so they didn't all bottleneck
Right.
onto the green.
And that's the value of a grid transportation network.
Yeah.
So one of the other things that I wanted to bring up, again, Glenn Miles has been traditionally very good at going back to the well. He's saying, no, it's done. If the city's able to come up with a portion of that 2.7 gap, maybe you're able to come up with 1.7, maybe he can go back to the well and get that additional million that, again, has escalated in the last six months. I don't know.
And do the whole thing.
Yeah, but he's been traditionally very successful. But at this point in time, he's saying, the well is dry. But if he can go back to the urban committee, because again, it's a statewide committee of all the MPOs across the state, and he can tell the story of, yes, this has been 12 years, yes, this project has taken an inordinate amount of funding, but look, the city is doing what they can do to bridge the gap. Can we find the extra? And it's just going to depend on what's happening with the other projects. There may or may not be excess funding come April. I don't know.
Question, the deadline of August 1st. If we don't meet that, how much money are we going to have to pay back?
It doesn't necessarily mean you have to pay back. That's not the payback point in time. So I don't know, again, what the total cost is the city's paid. You still have 10 years from the time you start spending right-of-way, that right-of-way obligation. And I think that what it is because you have 10 years for design. So we started design in 2012, okay? So that's design. You have 10 years to get, as you start design, to right-of-way. And so I think it was 2022 that we got right-of-way obligated. Then you've got another 10 years, so to 2032 in construction. So what happens if we don't utilize the money that's on the table right now? It gets swept into that statewide pot, and there's plenty of other projects that are gonna come up and say, oh, yep, I think we can use that. You get then to the back of the line at the urban committee, they now have it planned out 5-6 years in advance. But again, to get this big, so then it bumps the construction 5 to 6 years. So if you look at the costs, 5 to 6 years, if it's a $10 million project now, 5 to 10 years from now, it might be a $20 million project.
So again, I just want to ask the question, what liability do we have to pay any money back if we don't hit this August 1st
Okay.
deadline?
If you don't hit the August 1st number and you don't build by 2032, you would have to pay back all monies spent, all the federal money pot, so all of the design dollars and all of the right-of-way acquisition dollars.
You said it was about $500,000?
No.
No.
About 4.5 million,
4 million.
No, yeah, right.
about.
Or more. I'm not sure what the number
Right.
is, but it's 4.5 to 5 million.
It's way more than 1.7 is the one.
Yep.
So then we really don't have a choice. Because we don't have $4 to $5 million to pay back if we don't get this done. I mean, that's the way I look at it, unless I'm seeing this wrong.
This is why we wanted to,
And you have nothing at the end.
Right.
Right, that's what I mean.
That's why, you know, our thoughts are, you move forward with absolutely as much as you can. And so the kind of the way that we're looking at, though, moving forward with it as much as you can is to at least get the magenta bill figure.
or
Question.
and quite possibly a little bit further if we can, based on our working with,
And then it gives us another 8 years to try to get the funding either from the urban committee or within the city to find the money to build the rest of this.
Right away, in the magenta, do we have all of the right of way in the magenta acquired? Because I know there's some issues related to.
yes. We are in the process of acquiring that right away as we speak, and the property that's been one of our challenging ones, our attorney's working on what they call stipulation, which means we presented an offer, they'll come back and stipulate to that, and then we get right of entry. And that's a short way. I'm sure there's some more legal navigation that has to happen still, but the point being is that we've filed with the court, so we are,
That won't be an obstacle if we did decide
we
to.
will be there.
Right.
It's not an if, it's a when.
And in theory too, what happens, so let's say you get the magenta built or this built, one or the other, and you get to 2032 and you never found the money to finish the other phase. In theory then, you would only have to pay back the right-of-way acquisition for the phase that was unbuilt, the design for the phase that was unbuilt. And so that's gonna be a challenging thing for federal highways to figure out.
So if we, my understanding is where Lancaster meets this Ramsey, that intersection, going south from there, there's a portion that's in the urban renewal district. Is that true or false?
Yep.
Yeah, and if you are okay, I can be willing to show that boundary. So this is the right-of-way that we have acquired already. This is the right-of-way that we're working on through this property. And if I turn on,
And then all of this right-of-way around it should be
Yeah.
required.
you can see where the county has already, through our acquisition, has already mapped that. So this is our, and then we have this one pulled as well.
Yes.
Yes, so this is that piece that we've moved to stipulation in the court systems with the landowner to acquire.
So what I heard is that Glenn, if he saw that the city could come up with some more money, that would help him in the next meeting perhaps get the difference. So let's just say hypothetically that we have urban renewal that could come up with $1 million for that area. Then would that help Glenn maybe secure the difference that we
Which would be.
have of 1.7? Could he come up with a 1.7?
This is my complete guess on what Glenn would and would not be doing. And I will tell you this, I'm not very good at figuring out what Glenn's gonna decide to do. So I will say that, so that caveat. It will make should he choose to make that argument, it will make his argument stronger.
Because urban renewal has the money right now to do that. Now, whether urban renewal will approve that is another matter. But if they saw the scope and the size of this project and how much involved, I can't say what they will do, but I think they should be interested in looking at this.
And Matt, that's a good point. We've started socializing that with her.
Yeah.
Started.
So,
Good words.
because I like the idea of completing the whole project going forth and not piecemealing it, because then how long is it going to take before we take those other smaller roads and have to, until that gets done? I mean, I like the idea, let's get her done.
And right now, you're looking at about a $2.7 million funding gap to do that.
Right.
So basically what I'm hearing is if, big if, her were to participate to the extent of 2.7, we could shift that 2.7 out to property not in the district to deal with that, and the 2.7 would go towards the area within the district. Is that correct?
So what you're saying is your $2.7 million, you're saying we're gonna put that pot of money in here
Right.
to pay for this portion
Right.
of the project, and we want federal highways to be funding all of this.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
I don't know, this is guessing. I don't know that 2.7 is going to be possible with her. That's the deal. But somehow if we could get some money that will help Glenn get more money, then I would love to pursue that.
And we will happily take that message forward if we get a nod from council members that they wish us to do that.
So how much money do we have to work with
Far as what?
towards this project? They want us to commit 1.7 million.
Do you
Do
mean?
we have it?
Do you mean in our general fund, or do you mean in the HERA?
In whatever, in our own monies,
General fund.
general fund.
I'm not prepared today to be able to give you that look. I can tell you what we budgeted, which is essentially our match. And I have already prepped the finance director to be looking at this potentially to see what we could have. I do know we have a reserve fund that myself being here just shy of 3 months, haven't had a chance to fully understand, and I'm hoping that, my goal was by budget to have a good understanding of what that is and how it's been leveraged, if it has been, and have a better sense of that, but definitely is something I've already started working on. So.
Okay. Well, yeah, I just wanted to say, I agree, though, if urban renewal, I mean, that's in their district, and if they could help us out, that would be great.
Question on here?
For everybody's sake here, could we just take a step back and state what is the mission objective for the Ramsey Road extension? What happens if it doesn't exist? I just put it in context. I know that's going back a ways.
That's a good question. So we just kind of reviewed the purpose and need of the project, and it's, I think that the main purpose of the project and the need was intercity or kind of regional connectivity and reduction, alleviating some of the traffic off 95. That was kind of part of it.
Yeah, it was, of course, this was way before my time. It is a regional transportation project. That is why Glenn has been very successful up to this point of finding the funding, because it is not just a city. It doesn't benefit just the city, it benefits the regional area. And it is an interconnect road. It's one of the only roads that connects Coeur d'Alene, Hayden, Raptrum, Spirit Lake, and all points in between. So it's a very, very important road corridor. So that is the goal. If it isn't completed, it affects transportation in our area. That traffic will go someplace else that hasn't been planned, because it's kind of planned in everybody's transportation plan. You will have a liability that will have to be paid back that I think was discussed.
Yeah.
And so those are my best answers to that.
Okay, and just to follow on to that, since we're going to be discussing it later in Can I bring up something we're going to discuss later in council meeting as part of the subject here? Or am I going out of order in some
Only
way?
if it's related to this topic on the
Yeah,
agenda.
if it's related to this topic, sure.
How much of the H6 infrastructure overlays with what's being discussed here?
The corridor is one and the same.
Okay. Where all the pipe would be laid?
Well, there's a number of projects with the H6 discussion, but if you were to take the Phase 1 gravity sewer project, it lies in this corridor.
And so the point I'm trying to make is, while we're doing one thing, we do the other. Is that a fair statement?
No, the sewer needs to be done before the road.
All right.
It has to go in before.
So this might not be the question you were asking, but
Well, I'm trying to put everything into context.
if we're able to obligate funding successfully, this project will not be built this year. It will be obligated this year, but then built summer of '25. And the sewer then will be built in advance of that.
Is it possible to zoom out of this further so we can actually show how Ramsey, how far north? I think it's important to know how important this connectivity is, and this is a one void. And if you could zoom out, you get a better view of what I'm talking about.
I can. I will tell you that unfortunately, the CAD or the parcel overlay here, when you get to a higher elevation, slows way down. So I only brought in the parcel layer for partially of the county, not the whole county. So, but I can get down to 90 because it does tie into 90. So.
And I will point out too that, part of the reason that this project's been delayed so many years is because of that really difficult coordination with the airport. And that is why this hasn't been connected before. So, I mean, although this project has gone on for a really long time, once it's completed, it will solve that really complex problem of getting around the airport.
Ramsey right here? I believe this is Ramsey.
I believe you're right.
Yep.
So this is Ramsey as the interchange there at I-90, and it runs up, and then as it gets to the city portion, this is where it starts to meander a little bit before it ties in.
But it is,
So if you,
Councilman Roder is correct, it is the only gap from Coeur d'Alene to Spirit Lake. Highway 54.
It goes all the way to 54, so this becomes a real important
very
connected.
This little gap is the only gap in that road.
I was going to make a comment that I believe the section mile, if I can get my scale here, about that size. So if you look at,
And this is one of the things, so if we can't find that full bridge funding gap, worst case, I think that a good selection would be to at least get the magenta portion, that Phase 1B, because then that at least gets you that full north-south connectivity. It's not exactly how you want it, but.
Can we use circulation impact fees on this project?
those are fun, those are discussions we're having internally to determine the answer to that. I don't have it today, but.
Maybe.
So the answer is there's, in my opinion, a positive result there that we could likely dovetail in for that last phase, whatever we don't fund with the gap, if we don't get there, we would be looking at teaming with LTAC for future funding opportunity plus using potentially impact fee dollars.
How about potential impact fee, circulation fee from, say, Hayden Canyon that may have an impact on that?
No option is off the table at this point. We haven't ruled out anything at this point, but unfortunately, the time position that we're in, time crunch that we're in, warrants to be in front of you as a body so that we can get direction as we navigate towards what we're going to do with LTAC and with Glenn Miles at KMPO. So we don't want to get out of sync with what council's desires are in this area. So that's why we're in front of you. That's why it's important that we get that direction. That's why it's listed as an action item in case we do get there.
We all know why costs are going up, especially recently because of inflation. So I hear that this project, as it gets built out, is going to be phased in over many years. If we were to say wave a magic wand and be able to obtain all the dollars necessary to build it from its terminus today all the way up to Lancaster, and that is somewhere around $10.5 million, well, is that locked in? Or as this thing gets built out over the years with escalating costs, does that mean that all the interested parties have to go back to the well to get more money?
I think Krista is probably primed to answer that question better than me, but once we bid it in October, that price is locked.
Forever?
For the length of that project,
So-
yes.
But, no, I mean, is
I'll
it,
repeat back what I think you're asking, and you tell me if I'm hitting the mark, okay? So you're asking, let's just say we can bridge this $2.7 million funding gap, and we put the project out to bid. We still have to see what that low bid is that comes in.
okay,
The low bid might be $13 million. It might be $9 million.
yeah,
So if it's $13 million, then you have to go to the ITD board and get approval. One of the things that Glenn Miles has brought to our attention is, if it's 10% or less over bid, so that's roughly one point something million dollars, right? So let's just say the contractor bids it at $12.5 million. Well, we still have $1 million, an additional funding gap there before ITD will award the contract. So that will be an additional conversation then at that point in time.
so nothing's guaranteed here.
It's guaranteed. And then even once you get into construction, you might have a change order from a contractor,
Right.
something that's unforeseen. But again, it can go the other way, you know, the $10.7 million fund or dollar, I tasked someone at LTAC who's known for being very conservative for his bids. So he does high-end bids. So it's highly likely that a contractor will bid below that number. And especially too, this is something to consider too, the time of year that you bid really impacts how favorable of a bid you get. If we're bidding right now and we want a contractor to build this summer, they're gonna be like, well, I'm gonna put in a really fat bid because I've got plenty of work, but sure, if you pay me enough money and get enough profit, I'll take this project. But we're primed actually to be bidding this in the fall, to be building it next summer. So that's actually a really good time of year to get favorable bids. But you're right, nothing's guaranteed. I wish I could say, as an engineer, I like things black and white, just tell me what the bottom line is, but this is something that's a moving target.
I think that, to expound on that, this isn't a long-term project if we fund the whole thing. It would be,
Built next year.
it could possibly be built in one season. It may not quite get done in one season, but
It could be full bid.
the bid dollars don't get an escalation just because because let's say it takes
So what you're
If it takes a
saying,
summer and a half to build it, they don't get an escalation just because it took longer to build.
so what you're saying is if somehow we find enough money to pay for the whole thing, we have a better chance of controlling the cost.
Oh,
Yes,
we actually,
always.
like I said, we would get a bid. That's a solid number. Then you're only talking about unexpected changes that can't be foreseen, which happen on every project. I mean, I'm not going to deny that. And so you're talking about those incremental changes. And a lot of times, since the project is under construction, again, if you have to go back to well, that's a lot easier to stomach than we don't even have a number yet. And that's where we're at now, right? That's a hard place. And it probably would be built in the summer of '25, and there may be some minor things that would have to get done in the summer of '26, but it would be pretty much done, I think it'd be done hopefully in a season.
It likely will be open to traffic with just kind of some punch list items that following season. That's
So-
typically what I'll see in a project like this.
So I just want to make sure, because you were talking about overtime, that's not, if we fund the thing now, it's not an overtime, it's build it. So,
I was talking more in the phased approach. that
Right,
was
right.
discussed. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes. I've got numbers floating around in my head, and I'm, just like you, I'm a very black and white kind of person. And What I would like is something on paper or some write-up that shows the numbers, what we need, what we've paid, where it's gone, you know, the right-of-ways that we've paid for, you know, just something in writing that we can ingest and make a decision on something concrete.
So what I'm hearing what you want is you want project dollars spent to date for
Yes.
design and right-of-way, and we'll just assume that that right-of-way is done. And then what you want to is estimated construction dollars, so that you can see all in what has been spent on design right-of-way, what is projected to be spent on future construction, what has the city paid to date, and what's the funding gap.
Yes. Thank you.
Mayor, question, are we looking for some feedback from council on what we're thinking, or what are we going to do?
I believe so. We're not looking for any commitment, except that we don't want to commit a bunch of work to making this happen if council was objecting to the entire concept. Is that correct, Lisa?
Right? We are hoping that
In other words, we don't need a motion tonight, I don't think.
The thought was is that if we, if council felt inclined to give us direction about us looking at that phased approach using, maximizing the amount of money that we currently have obligated, I don't know if that's the right word, towards this project, scheduled towards this project, that we would move forward with that, which would likely mean that we're coming from Lancaster south. And then from there, if the, you know, to sort of maximize that, to work with LTAC and our design consultants to take advantage of those funds to the best of our abilities, we would move forward in that and bring forward back a project for a future decision point. That would be our request. If it's just a nod at this point, that's fine. If it's more than that, that works too, either way.
Do we, Lisa, want to be able to move forward and have discussions with urban renewal on,
That's already occurring.
oh, okay.
Any other questions for council? Okay,
I will caution you, if we flip and do the magenta, and try to extend the magenta west and maximize those dollars, David Evans and Associates will have to do some design adjustments. That will require a supplemental agreement. They will want more money to do that. That's, it takes a few months for me to work that through on my end. I would have to sit down and Alan and I would have to negotiate more from it.
we can't just send Guido and Rocco over to talk to him?
I wish.
I think there may be, regardless, because splitting the project apart again is going to cost them money, so.
Right.
Right.
I just wanted to be transparent in that so that you're not wondering if we come short on the money, you know, decide, let's maximize what we've got here, and I come back to Alan and he brings it back to you and says, oh, there's another $150,000.
I'm pretty sure we're going to move to doing the magenta. That's the
Okay.
most juice for the squeeze.
That, I think that's really,
That's,
once you brought it up, I was like, yes.
if
It provides the connectivity.
if Federal Highways will let us do that, that is by far
And that's
the,
my challenge, is to get Federal Highways to say yes, split the
Right,
phases.
right.
We already know that they agreed to let us build phase 1A first.
Right.
But I think that they'll let us build phase 1B first.
Has there been any preliminary discussion with federal about the flip, or is this, you know, the potential that, so they aren't even aware of the consideration yet? We're just, yeah, okay.
The
But
point,
I will be taking that back this week and having those conversations.
All right.
and we wanted your nod of direction on that, so hence why we are before you.
May I speak? I would approve what you're presenting, but based on the conversations we had about controlling cost overruns, I would also support socializing with urban renewal to fill in the gap. Let's just get it done. Get it done and move on.
Okay, if there aren't any other questions, we could entertain a motion to adjourn until our regular city council meeting.
So
So moved, we got a second?
Second.
Do we need a roll call for that? All in favor?
Yes.
Adjourn. Thanks, everybody.